Hey, welcome back to my network automation video series. In this video, we're going to be talking about Visual Studio Code and specifically how to use Python virtual environments within Visual Studio Code. So kind of how do we get started in that? But first I want to talk a little bit about why Visual Studio Code. So most of us, since we're network engineers, didn't start out using specific programming environments and programming text editors. We started out with things like Notepad++ or Text Wrangler, maybe if you're on a Mac, but more powerful text editors, but pretty much text editors. On the other side of that spectrum, you're going to have developers who started out in IT using very powerful development environments like NetBeans or Eclipse, and those give you some great tools as far as like looking into classes when you're programming, but it's probably not something we're going to need for scripting for network automation. So kind of in the middle of that, there's this sweet spot that's come out, and things like Visual Studio Code are in there, as well as there's also Atom and Sublime Text as well. And these are going to be extensible programs, using that word extensible again, where you can install add-ons to have them do so many different things. So with Visual Studio Code, we're going to install a Python add-on, and what that's going to allow us to do is it's going to do a lot of the harder work in Python, like just formatting and making sure you don't have any syntax errors. It takes care of a lot of that. And it can also do debugging. You can do debugging from right within the program. That's a super handy feature. And things outside of Python, it can tie into GitHub, so you can have all your GitHub repositories and pushing and pulling all done right from the program there. So it's a really powerful tool, and I find myself using it just as a normal text editor as well for day-to-day use. It's just what I go to now. So it's definitely the way to go as far as programming with Python in the network engineer world. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So here we are on a fairly fresh install of Visual Studio Code. So when you first open it up, you're going to see this welcome page here where you can start a new file or open a folder. But what I want to do first is I want to go to the command palette. And the command palette's where you're going to do a lot of your configuration changes for Visual Studio Code itself. So if we go up to the menu here, View, Command Palette, there's a keyboard shortcut as well to get there. But from this command palette, what I want to do is install code command in path. And what this is going to let us do, you can see at the bottom right here, it says it successfully installed the code command in path. What this will let us do is we can actually start Visual Studio Code from the command prompt now. And one reason that I like that is instead of going to open folder or navigating through a GUI here to open something, what you can do is let's quit Visual Studio Code here and drop back to a command prompt. So here we are back at our command prompt, and we are in the same folder we were working on in the last video where we have SNMP Polar Code and Virtual Environment. So I want to start Visual Studio Code from right here instead of having to navigate through it through a menu. So what we can do now that we've installed code in our path is just type code dot, and that's actually going to launch Visual Studio Code right from this folder. So there it's going to launch, and you can see on this File Explorer on the left-hand side, we have our code with requirements.txt, and then we also have our virtual environment that we created. So the next thing I want to do is actually open up a new Python file. So if I right click on this and do new file, and let's just do test.py. And you can see it popped up a little notification here at the bottom saying that the Python extension is recommended for this type of file and asking if we want to install it. We do, but I'm not going to install it right here. Let's actually go to the extension store and see how you can do that for any extension. So if we go back to that command palette and type extensions, you can see install extensions here. So let's go ahead and run that. And you can see here it's recommending Python. So if we click on Python, here it is. You're going to see a little description about it, how many people have downloaded it, what star rating it is. So it's pretty much like an app store for Visual Studio Code add-ons. So this clearly is the right one. It's from Microsoft, 19 million downloads, 4 3/4 stars. So it looks like what we want to install. So let's go ahead and install that. And that's going to give Visual Studio Code the ability to work more with Python. So that's what's going to allow it to do auto completion, and it can do what's called linting. Linting is going to point out errors in your code. So if you have a syntax error, it'll highlight that automatically for you. So what we want to do is let's just go and do a print hello world. And if you notice, I didn't actually have to close that parentheses or quote. It did all that for me. It'll do a lot more auto formatting than that. My favorite thing is indentation. Python is very sensitive to white space, and it takes care of most of that for you. So because this is a Python program and it recognizes that, we have an option here to just hit play. And we can actually run the Python file in a terminal. So let's go ahead and do that. But first, let's go ahead and set our virtual environment up. So if we just run it now, it's going to run in the global Python environment. And like we talked about in the last video, that's not always the best for managing all your dependencies. So if we go back to that command palette and we type Python select interpreter, that's the one we want right there. So these are all the different Python interpreters that we can run. And because we're running from the folder that we were working in, where it had the SNMP Polar Virtual Environment, it had that folder listed, so it's searching for that right now. So we can see that it knows about that. So we can run that, just click that. And now when we hit play, you can see it popped up a terminal window down here. And it did that same command we did in the last video, source, and then our SNMP Polar Virtual Environment, and activated it, and then it ran that piece of code and showed hello world there. But so it knew about that because we were working from this folder and it had the virtual environment listed within it. But what if you have all your virtual environments stored somewhere else? What if you keep a separate folder, or you're just working in some one-off area and it doesn't necessarily have your virtual environment listed? How do you do that? Well, everything in Visual Studio Code is actually stored in a settings.json file. And so we can see what it's doing here. So let's go back to our command palette. Let's type workspace. So if we open a workspace settings, and then if we go here to the upper right, there's this little icon and it says open settings JSON. So if we do that, here you can see what it did. So it created this file called settings.json, and within it, it's saying Python path SNMP Polar Virtual Environment bin Python. So that's where it's actually selecting our virtual environment. So if you ever go up to your command palette and you go to select interpreter and you're trying to find your virtual environment and for some reason it's not listed here, or you're not in the right folder, or it's just not seeing it, you can go to workspace settings and then open the settings.json file, and you can do it by hand with this Python path, and it'll actually kind of auto-complete that for you as you start typing. So it's pretty intelligent. So that is how you are going to install Python within Visual Studio Code. Also get Visual Studio Code to your path so you can launch it from the command line, and two different ways to do your virtual environment, either through the command palette or through the settings.json. In our next video, we're going to start looking at GitHub and how to integrate that into Visual Studio Code as well. Thanks for watching. Bye.